Welcome back, everybody, to Exit Philosophy 2. After a 1 week hiatus, we're joined by co-host Mal Romanin, and we'll give you a little background on Mal in a second. But just to explain that Scott MacArthur, has decided to go in another direction for the next little while, and he's in Nova Scotia, as many of you know, and he's looking to establish a new life down there, and not a big fan of what's happening with the Blue Jays. So, Exit Philosophy lives on, and Mal Romanin is our new co-host. And just a little background for Mal: 12 years as director of communications with the Blue Jays. So I've known Mal a long time, 2006 to 2017. But before that, he was still in the press box doing stats. He's sort of uh, on board with analytics right from the ground zero. And Mal, tell us about your background with the Blue Jays and starting out doing a new stats program that carried you through to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's quite a story, I suppose. At least for me, it was, anyways. But when I was a young lad going to ball games, there was a lawyer in Toronto that would do his own program. It was like a two-pager. He would print it up at his office and then sell it on the street corner for $1, which I found kind of interesting because back then all you got were game day programs, and there wasn't much to them other than as there should be, the PR spin and scorebook and advertisements and things. So it was the first time you were seeing some different kind of thoughts on how the game was played. So I got talking to the guy. I'd spent a lot of time with him going to get my program, and he kind of approached me about doing some scorekeeping, so to speak, analytics style, where you record everywhere the ball went by watching games on TV, and you would get paid $20 for it. And I thought that was heaven back in the day. Somebody's paying me to watch baseball. And that's kind of what, there's a company called Total Sports that bought them out and then put it in the press box, gave us laptops as got, you weren't doing it on paper anymore. Like we're very old men now, so that those days are over. But that's what kind of started MLB Game Day. And Major League Baseball saw this was going on in their press box, and we're like, what's going on here? Why are we paying somebody to sell our data back to our teams? So they would finally got the brainwave to start ML BAM and take this process over. And that's kind of how I got my start being in the press box with the Jays and being around fine gentlemen like yourself and getting to know the ins and outs of
That might be the first time you've ever said that.
yeah,
But
yeah, maybe that's right. I mean, it's not a comment I heard too often.
I always wondered about why MLB was so possessive about their own stats. And I remember the turning point when I was still with the Expos, and they wanted to prevent outside sources from, as you said, selling the stats back to teams. And I remember how it affected Seymour Siwoff, who was the owner of Elias Sports, who goes back to the 20s in terms of
Right.
recording the history of baseball. And I was a good friend of Seymour. Seymour was so old that his BBWA card was 001.
One. That's
Yeah.
correct.
And he passed away. He lived to be 100. And he
Is
passed at
yours 7 or 8, Rich?
but yeah, I always wondered about that, but now it's beginning to make sense, and it's your fault. I'll blame
Yeah,
you for that.
that's
Um,
right.
Mal, I mean, I worked in PR with the Jays for 4 years. It didn't work out as well as I had hoped, but you had 12 years there, plus years before that. You worked with Jay Stenhouse in PR. But you also dealt with, I'll read them off. You tell me if I'm wrong on any of them. J.P. Ricciardi, Alex Anthopoulos, Ross Atkins, Paul Beeston, Paul Godfrey, Mark Shapiro, John Gibbons twice, Cito Gaston, John Farrell.
That's
Is that about?
correct. Yeah, I think that's the list as far as executives and management go.
So
Um, for the
Yeah.
baseball side of things. Yeah, yeah, that's quite a number of them, I guess. But maybe that tells you about the state of the team over 12 years. It's not
Yeah.
the Pittsburgh
But
Steelers,
there's
you
been
know.
stability for the last 9 years, and we're going to get into
There
that.
there has been stability,
I
continuity, I
read
think they
off all
call it.
those names. I read off all
Yeah.
those names, and then you go, wow, that's a lot of different people. But the last 9 years, now going into the 10th year, is the same people. It's Mark Shapiro as president and Ross Atkins as general manager. And I have a question for you, and I'm bumping this up. I did the research yesterday. But 10 years, 2016 was the Blue Jays going to the league championship series. They got beat by Cleveland.
That's right.
And then Cleveland and the Cubs played one of the epic World Series I've ever been to. But from 2016, which was the first year of Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, how many president GM tandems do you believe are still there where they were in 2016?
Oh, wow. Um, so 9 years later, how many? Well, uh, Cashman, how are the Yankees?
Cashman was just the GM and
That's
he moved
right.
up to take over as executive VP and GM. So he's still there making the decision. There's 10 GMs who are still calling shots, but most of them have moved up and become either president and hired a GM underneath them or are executive vice president and GM. So they've progressed within the organization, but the same structure of president and GM. There's only one other team
Well, I was
among.
going to say can't be too many. That's for
There's
sure. And who's
one
that
other
team?
team. The other team is the Cleveland Guardians, formerly
Well,
the
how about
Indians.
that? How about
And
that?
Antonetti and Chernoff. I don't
Right.
know what it is about Lake Erie, but Shapiro and Atkins came from Cleveland, and now the only other president and GM from 2016 are in Cleveland when they
And
left.
it's hard to argue the success of that franchise. I mean, I know it's different. It's not exactly, apples to apples being in the Central Division and payrolls and things like that. But Cleveland's obviously built a solid foundation with the continuity they've had there. So, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, sports today, right? It's instant gratification world, and the pressure on people to perform immediately usually results in some changes to your your approach quickly.
Yeah. And like you said, it's a different situation in Cleveland with the then Indians, now the Guardians, but it's not as easy as it seems to move from a small payroll to an almost unlimited payroll. And we've seen that difficulty. Some guys can handle it. And we're looking now at a president and a general manager who really haven't taken full advantage of that.
Sometimes I think, and you see that across all sports, where, obviously the payroll is a handicap if you don't have it. However, it also removes some of the issues you don't have to encounter in how to spend it when you actually end up doing. I mean, you could go back to hockey with Glenn Sather, you know what I mean, moving to the Rangers and how, things like that. I mean, way back then, you all of a sudden you have some unlimited resources, and it's not always easy to allocate them because, when you don't have a choice, kind of makes your choices easy sometimes. You're only
Yeah,
dealing in one pool, and it's there's one avenue to acquire players and talent, and sometimes it makes life a little easier on you. It's a
yeah. I
strange
mean,
thing.
my Montreal Expos background proves that. I mean, there were so many. I remember in during the strike in 90 between 94 and 95, Bill Stoneman saying to me that the payroll was $15 million as it stood right there during the strike, and that they could start the season and not draw anyone to Olympic Stadium and he could break even. I
Right.
mean, and this is from a former pitcher who became like a tight ass executive VP of finance and a part-time GM over there. And then you had Kevin Malone, who was the opposite. He went from the small market expos, and then ended up with the Dodgers and really couldn't handle it. Didn't handle it well. Maybe, I had him on a conversation and he talked about the differences in opinion with the new ownership and how they butted heads. And, I could see that. But the bottom line was that he wasn't able to maximize an unlimited payroll compared to where he had come. So to your point, it's not as easy sometimes.
Well, it's not as easy, and those are the rules of the game. When you hand out big contracts, there's no guarantee what you're going to get for that dollar value, but you're locked into it. So you are stuck with whatever you purchase. There's no return on it, and it's difficult to move that product, which i.e., very expensive player, if it doesn't work out. So it's not always easy to manage the dollars, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, an example of that, even with this current Blue Jays roster and payroll, is like, would they have offered those last 2 years at 25 million to George Springer if they didn't have the budget for it, if they were a smaller market? No, they would have been outbid for it. And now it's time to pay the piper because his last 2 years of that contract are coming up and he's not working out, is not
Well,
paying
would
for
they
it.
offer it to him? No, nobody else did.
Yeah. Well, that's
That's
it.
why he ended up in
When you
Toronto.
have,
Nobody else did. So,
right,
right, like,
you
but
have
you
the
can't,
money,
that's your point,
you
right?
you can
So,
say, well, we'll eat the last 2 years. Well, it's tough to eat when the guy's still active and wants to play and
and you
plays
can always
low-key
move
defense.
players, but you got to pay a price to move them because the asset doesn't reflect the 25 million. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's a devaluing asset. So can you move a guy? 100%. But you're also going to have to, you're not getting the value for it, for sure. So
Yeah.
that's got to be part of your business strategy. I remember when we did the same thing with Russ Martin, right? Is you had to give him the extra year.
Yeah.
Um, he needed that. It was even fourth year then, and you're like, well, I mean, it's not an 8-year deal by any means, but you're probably dealing with diminishing returns. But what you get at the front of the deal is what you're trying to do in this game is win the whole bloody thing. You know what I mean? So you're going, but you have to be managing that as the years go by. Maybe you're going to try and move on from a guy while he's still productive. Have somebody else take on that
Yeah.
risk.
Another example of that is Vernon Wells. And Vernon wasn't because they had a large payroll at the time, but it didn't look like they were going to be able to move that contract. And they did. And credit to I think Alex was there at the time, wasn't he?
Correct. Correct. Because
Yeah, and
that
then
was like our only big contract then with
yeah,
JP. That was like a big deal. And it
yeah.
and let's be honest, back then you didn't have the payroll. I mean, I know it's Toronto,
Right.
but you
Yeah, no,
didn't have it.
it was when JP was getting ready to leave or getting ready to be ushered out, he had reached the point where he was just daily whining and complaining about ownership and how do you expect me to compete in the AL East with no payroll
Well,
and
and I think you know what that's a great point, and I think that's probably we'll get into that with the Jays. When you get to a point with a management team where it becomes more about their job than it does the long-term future of the club. And hey, this is human nature. I mean, we all get to like when you hand out deals like Vernon Wells because you can't afford not to have them there. And the long term, it's probably not a wise move for the health of the club, but you're in save my job mode, so to speak, at times, and I think that's where we're looking at with the current regime. They're gonna do everything they can to compete next year. That's been obvious. I mean, they're stating it. Everybody knows it. But is that the wise move? You could make a very good case that this obviously not where they're at. A very wise decision to try to win next year. You know what I mean? Because winning means how do we sneak in a backdoor playoff spot? Most
well,
likely. But that's
well, let's
that's just it's human nature too,
yeah,
right?
let's jump ahead to that because that's a topic that I had for later on. But um, let's talk about that now because you brought it up. Is it possible over the course of 1 5-month off season to build from a 74 win team to an 88 to 92 win team? Is that possible? I mean, we saw the Royals lose 106 games a year ago. And then now they just lost game 4 to the Yankees and reached, the postseason and then through a round. Is that a role model for the Blue Jays?
Is Bobby Witt coming?
No, but
Is
that
it
would be
possible?
healthy.
Yeah. Is it possible? 100% it's possible. I mean, if you look, I mean, it's been done before. Is it difficult? Very difficult. The creativity you need, the funds you need, obviously money to be able, but in in the current state of where there are, I say it's probably unlikely. I mean, it's been done. So look at the Royals, but it gets done through different avenues. You got to pull all your available options at player procurement to acquire the guys you need and be very creative. And so far, it's hard to suggest that this group has been creative or is going to display the creativity that can do. You need to be making deals the other way with the Moreno Gurriel duels, bringing people in that way, as opposed to, signing Justin Turner types, because you're not at that level where adding veterans is going to do it. And I'm not sure I see the young players that can make the impact there, but it can be done. I mean, you can build a bullpen, you can make some astute starting pitching depth trades that bring in guys like you say Seth Lugo and Waka and guys like that, that can, just build that depth, and that's what kind of things you need to do.
Yeah, to me, Mal, over the course of my career, which goes back to I think before you were born, obviously 73, but free agency
No,
came in.
unfortunately, no.
Oh, okay, free agency.
Thanks.
Well, you're a young looking whatever you are.
Yeah, right. Good, good.
Uh, but the classic rebuild mode to me over the years of just observing is that you take 3 years and you have a strong farm system. You bring people up. You suffer losing for a couple of years. You look and see on that third year, if you wanted a 3-year rebuild, this is what you do. You look on that third off season and you say, I have a hole here, here, and one starting pitcher. And then you go out and you look for that either using minor league surplus and trade or a free agent, key free agent signing. But you need to identify no more than 3 spots. And I know the bullpen is easy to rebuild. That's the easiest part to rebuild. We've seen it. We saw a guy go in last night named Job. I don't even know. He had 2 major league appearances,
Woohoo.
and then yeah, he did his own Tommy John surgery. It's crazy.
That's right. He does them in the clubhouse.
But that's the classic rebuild is you have 2 or 3 spots, you identify them. You may have lost 106 games the year before, but you have a strong infrastructure of homegrown players.
Correct. And that's
But
always the key
now
because the rules are.
to do it in 5 months for the Blue Jays, they're first of all, their farm system doesn't have that sort of inventory where you can package something and get a really good player. They're not that deep. And
And if you
second
want
of
to,
all,
Mhm.
that bullpen is a mess.
Right. And I think those are the easy things to criticize with this regime. Those are the things that were promised and they were supposed to build their entire philosophy on. And those are the parts that are in the worst shape. I mean, you have to have a minor league system that is on the verge of supplanting some of those veteran guys that you keep bringing in, and where you can deal with guys like Springer, you know what I mean, and not have to go out and get the Justin Turners and things like that. However, they do have the dollars. Excuse me a sec. They have the dollars that if you allocate it correctly, you can expedite that program where you can go out and spend dollars wisely to supplement everything else you're doing. But you're right. I think the most important thing you need to have a continuous thing. I think the biggest word that I hate when listening to people analyze baseball, where other sports you can do it, say that window to win. There's no window in baseball. There just isn't. I mean, the Dodgers don't have a window. The Yankees don't have a window. There are ways to maintain and and keep the bus rolling without completely collapsing a program and doing what is the in thing is a rebuild. So I think, but you have to make sure whatever's going on with your minor league system that you've got, that's the foundation, and it always
Yeah.
has been, because those are the rules. That's how it works.
The advantage to having a huge payroll, and the Blue Jays weren't used to having a huge payroll, so they spent it all on first tier guys. But the Yankees used to have guys on the bench that were being paid like starting players with other teams, and that's the only reason they signed with the Yankees, that and wearing the pinstripes. They were getting paid like a starting player, and that's the advantage of a huge payroll. Dodgers the same way, so that you can weather the injuries that are inevitable over the course of 162 games. But the Jays, you looked at their bench in May, June, July, it's a terrible bench. There were four guys that had no particular tools. They had five mediocre tools, and you can't build a bench that way, that for a winning team. And I think that's part of the learning process for what this group in their 10th year in their 10th year of trying are
Keep trying,
probably
boys.
learning. And
Yeah,
then to rebuild over a 5 month window of opportunity, and I know you don't like the word window, but over the winter, over the off
yeah, for
season,
sure, for
you
sure.
don't identify George Springer as somewhere that doesn't need to be filled in, because these are the back end of George Springer that you were counting on in the first 2 years, and that's why you signed him. But you didn't sign him to be your main man in 2025 and 2026. That's not why you signed him. So it's a sort of a hidden hole to their plan.
And even if you can carry the money at this point, the plan was to have somebody contributing in his spot where he can become lesser of a player, play a smaller role, maybe a platoon guy, like those Yankee teams where they're playing starters, but they had a bunch of platoon guys, where you're taking advantage of what skills they have left, and not forcing them into roles that have diminished, and unfortunately, the rest of the program, the rest of the organization hasn't been built that way. And he's still leading off. Like you just that's a major problem. He's gonna have to hit eighth, and you need to spot him. And if you can't move the contract, and the other thing is, you got to try to move something like that. And like, good luck, but you can do it. You just
And to me, the reason, and you pointed to the Dodgers and the Yankees as examples of there's no window, there's never a window, you have to win. You're always under pressure to win, to be in the postseason, to be in the Final Four. There's that pressure. To me, the Blue Jays, and I've discussed it on previous on Exit Philosophy 1 with Scotty Mack, but
previous version.
the money that they sunk into renovating the stadium and building the player development complex makes it essential to ownership, to Rogers, to put a winner on the field immediately. You can't build that $300 million palace at Rogers Center and then say that we're going to win in 3 years. It's impossible.
Not in year nine, and not when you've stated all along, and every time you speak to the media, which isn't very frequently, that gives you a competitive advantage. We're looking for a competitive advantage. So, you just can't use them as buzzwords. They've got to actually be a competitive advantage. So somebody's got to come here, and you've got to win. You've got to win the battles with other teams to acquire players because of those facilities, and we're not seeing that. It's just not happening. So you're right. You got to find a way to justify the expenditure of your minor league facility and the Rogers Center. And they're lovely. They're much better than they were. There's no question about it. But none of that matters if you don't play good baseball. And I can remember saying that back in the day with JP Ricciardi and those guys. The only thing that matters is what happens on that field. Now, obviously, it, it, you do build that out. There's other ways to run your organization well, and take more money from the public, but you won't get it if you don't win baseball games, and I think that's something we're going to see next year, is going to be really interesting to see what kind of attendance we see next year, because up until this point, there's been a lot of positivity and a lot of investment from the public believing the team was good enough to get to the playoffs. And I don't think they believe that now. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of response the paying public gives them. Because I got a feeling you're going to see some empty ballparks until they prove that they can win.
Yeah, I think that they misread the fan base in terms of bringing back the 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 triumvirate of president, general manager, and manager. I mean, it might end up being the same result, but the perception with the fan base is not good going into the off season. And if they don't get Soto, if they're not involved in some pursuits of bigger name free agents, everybody will be shrugging and going same old thing. I don't even know if Ross Atkins has had some of his power usurped now by Mark Shapiro, who no longer has the responsibility of the renovations, which took 2 years, of building the PDC, which took a couple of years. Now he can turn full attention to player acquisition, but is that good enough? Is he good enough? Are they good enough to put a 5 month turnaround?
I would suggest, and that would be my belief, that he's always had that, and it's always been his program. He's always been mostly involved in player acquisition. I think there's enough people uh, that have been able to take on the renovations on his behalf, where while great work on the renovations, he's focused on the baseball team. He's the GM, so to speak, for the most part. He's not worried about who he's calling up and sending down and who's the new bullpen piece, but that's his baseball team. That's his baseball team, and I don't see why it's going to change, because I don't think anything has changed within, you know, the front office. I think it's exactly the same operation, where you've got a lot of people with input, but the buck stops with Mark. I mean, I don't know. I've been in those meetings. You've been in those meetings. I know what it's like at trade deadline. It's the president running the show, deciding who to acquire, deciding if the offers are good, and deciding who's on that baseball field for the big pieces. He decides that. So I don't think anything's going to change. That's my humble opinion as it goes forward. I just think that's the program.
Well, here I was trying to be encouraging, and you're throwing a damper on that whole that whole premise.
Well,
Thanks a
yeah,
lot.
that's just not how it works. That is my opinion.
Before we get into reviewing the current postseason and the series that are just completed and ongoing, we all know people in Florida because of the amount of time we spend there at spring training or whatever, and Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. What do you say to those people that that are trying to regroup and rebuild?
Oof, I mean, all you can do. I mean, if you can help out in any way. I know I mentioned this to you before we got on this podcast about our equipment manager from the second year of existence till I think 2000 and 16, 15. Jeff Ross was a fixture in the Blue Jays, and they lost a lot. And there's a GoFundMe set up for him. But I mean, there's so many people. I mean, anything you can do to help. And I mean, it's just an awful situation down there, obviously. And I mean, it ripped through where, our spring training facilities were. Tampa Bay, obviously, you saw what happened to Tropicana Field. But, you send your best, you think of them. And more importantly, if there's anything anybody can do to help them recover, I think that's the most important thing, is what we actually do. So, I encourage everybody to do whatever they can do to help the people that, obviously, when they're down there, make their days better when they're in spring training and down watching baseball games and the weather's great. It's a difficult situation for everybody, for sure.
Well said. And the impact of one such hurricane is bad enough, and then to follow it up less than 2 weeks later with a second one. And to me, there's always a worst case scenario. It's like a doctor performing surgery, Tommy John or whatever. They give you the maximum, the worst case scenario. And thankfully, Milton didn't come up with the 12-foot swells and the worst case scenario. But the meteorologists were all predicting that sort of disaster, and it didn't happen. But it's still devastating for anyone down there, especially with the fact that it's impossible to get insurance for your home because
That's
of
right.
the number of hurricanes,
That's
and
right.
it becomes reach into your pocket and see what you got, and
Right.
sometimes it's not enough.
Wow. I'll tell you, the least likely thing though was the truck roof ripping off. How
Yeah,
many times were you in that facility thinking that was going to happen? Well,
at least God has a sense of humor.
right. Well, I'm sure they're knitting a new roof as we speak. So
I, I remember at Olympic Stadium, there was a windstorm and a big chunk of Kevlar is just hanging down. I have a picture of it somewhere, and I go, hey, that's nothing compared to what happened at the Trop. But all of a sudden, I feel better about the disaster that was the Kevlar roof at Olympic
yeah,
Stadium,
it's not such a big deal of it.
which was people forget that it was in storage in a warehouse in Marseille from 1976 to 1989. Like it was just Kevlar in a
That is
base
so ridiculous.
in
The
Marseille.
roof is in storage.
Yeah, and the rats were eating it, and they had to redo they pulled it out and it had holes in it, and they tried shooting the rats and they were bulletproof because they had Kevlar. They had eaten the Kevlar.
They're like, bring it on.
Bring it on, chump. Le chump.
Yeah, right. Holy smokes.
But
I mean,
yeah,
two
and
classic ballparks.
you may not know it, but in 1989, I was in Montreal and the Sky Dome was about to open, and they
Yep.
had that rehearsal the night before where they pulled the roof back and everybody was there cheering,
Yeah,
cheering
yeah.
up. Well, we had our roof on and we pulled it back like hours before so that we would be the first retractable roof in Canada. And that had
Not as many cheers or
not as many cheers, and nobody remembers that except me.
and you weren't sure if it was going to go back on.
Oh God, no. Not even sure if it did at the time.
Yeah, it's now an open air stadium. That's right.
Okay. The division series, the playoffs thus far. One division series, Dodgers against the Padres. What are your impressions of that? To me, that is like a neighborhood brawl. Neighbors in Southern California, they don't like each other. They're acting dumb at times.
It's
Like
fantastic. Yeah.
Tatis is playing to the crowd, and I always believe that you should all of your enthusiasm and sort of playing should be to your own dugout. And that's the way I taught my guys. To your own dugout, let others observe what you're doing, let them get mad, but never turn your attention because you'll fire them up. And definitely they're firing that crowd up. That Dodger Stadium is going to be a zoo for game 5.
And I mean, it's great theater. So you are right. I mean, the absurdity, the analogy about your neighbor. I mean, you're looking for every little minor thing they do wrong and blowing it up 10 times. Can you believe they did that? I mean, the Dave Roberts stuff is just classic silliness. I mean, I'd be embarrassed if I was him to talk about how unsettling the ball bouncing off the screen
Oh,
was. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, did he throw it with a little juice? Of course. It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
It reminded me that Dave Roberts' reaction to Manny Machado throwing the ball, and it bounced a couple of times before, and there's netting in front of him. So, a
It
point was
just
being made. But it reminded me of August 7th, 1989 at Wrigley Field when Walton, the Cubs outfielder, hits a line drive off Pascual Perez's wrist, his glove wrist. The ball bounces out in the air to Jeff Houston at second base. He makes the catch for the out. And Ron McLean comes out to check on Pascual. And while he's on his way out, Pascual takes a baseball and fires it into the Cubs dugout because somebody's yelling at him and whatever.
different times.
And so now he's getting worked on. And Rick Sutcliffe is throwing baseballs at Pascual and Ron McLean. It's
Right.
like this is how it should be handled, you know, not complaining to Major League
Not
Baseball.
sending video to Mr. Manfred. You know what I mean?
That's when men were men,
When men were men. Yeah.
and Pasquale was unique.
Oh, I can imagine. There's no question. There are some characters, right?
So,
Handle things a
I
little
mean,
differently. I'll tell you what, I love what Profar did. I just thought that's
yeah,
just enjoying yourself, having fun, enjoying the moments, getting people fired up. Um, you know,
yeah, leaping into the crowd, fans going up to try and catch the ball. You got it, you know it, and you're staring the fan down who you were battling with. Like
yeah,
at that moment in time, you're not thinking of how Mookie Betts feels running around the bases. That's the last thing on your mind, you know. Oh, I should have
no.
let Mookie know I had it. Hell no.
It,
Just
it, it it's called it having enthusiasm for what you're doing in the moment and enjoying it. There's nothing wrong with it. And then bringing the ball back out later to the fan and give it
yeah.
to them. Fantastic.
I think he's a free agent. Is there room on Blue Jays for a guy like that?
Probably not. We need another one tool middle infielder. We got room. We
Okay.
got five of them.
So Dodgers 325 million payroll, Padres 168.9 million. And this is a street fight. This is a battle. This is probably the best series, the most interesting series going on. Who do you just a lot of people will be listening to this after that series is over, but who do you like
Right.
going in?
Well, I'm pulling for the Padres. I mean, which I mean, you can look at the histories of both clubs and find fault with how the Padres operated for a while there, and they did spend a lot of money. I just find there's an arrogance with the Dodgers the way they operate, and I think they're good by default because of the money they spend, and they still have holes. One I think is their manager. I think for years in postseason games you could see where he just doesn't have a feel for what's going on. You can go back to when Darvish ironically was pitching for him, and the irony is going to be pitching against him tonight. But I'm really intrigued about how both teams are going to use the bullpen tonight, and when do they go to it? They both have good bullpens. I think the Padres is really outstanding, but I mean Darvish has looked good. So you're really caught in how far do you push a guy? And that's where you've got to be really paying attention as a manager to what's going on. I mean, like I said, Roberts back in the day years ago when Darvish didn't have it and he left him on the mound and you could see it coming, as opposed to say even, the Barrio stuff with the Jays when clearly not paying attention to what's happening in front of you and being stuck to a script that you could get into by the front office. And boy, if the Dodgers don't do that more than anybody, that's kind of their modus operandi as they speak. And I'm really curious to see how both managers go with what's happening in front of them as opposed to the best laid plan before the game. And I think that's going to be the most intriguing thing. And I'm really curious to see how Darvish throws tonight because he's been sharp and Yamamoto obviously wasn't. So
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting.
I'm a big proponent of postseason bullpen strength. And to
I think
me,
it's the most important thing, the way the game is set up
yeah,
today. Yeah.
and to me, the Padres understood that and loaded up. And I'm thinking Padres, and I'll probably be wrong, but that's the belief that I have is that the stronger bullpen usually prevails in the postseason. First of all, because there's so many off days, you can use your bullpen guys almost every night. You know,
Right.
you
And the rested, they used what, five guys the other night? It
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
matter. Everybody's good to go. You know what I mean?
And I look at the Dodgers bullpen, and I remember when he was a Blue Jay, but Anthony Randa, I think his name is, he couldn't get anybody out, and now he's a key
We've
member of
had some of those guys.
and Daniel Hudson is there, and to me the Padres measure up better in that regard.
Well, and I think those are the things good front offices pay attention to. I mean, this is a bullpen game in the playoffs. I mean, it's called paying attention to how the rules are set up and taking advantage of them. And that's where, people criticize analytics people for the way the game's played. And I'm sorry, analytics people find the most efficient way to play the game. It's the rules of the game that are the problem. If you want the game to look different, change the parameters. And I think smart front offices are going, in short series, you got an advantage with a bullpen. I mean, anything can happen. It's one game. I mean, Yamamoto could shove and Otani could hit 3 bombs, right? You don't know, but the Padres have an advantage there. And that's where, looking at other series, I think if there's one team I'm concerned about, it's the Mets. I mean, I don't see, Diaz hasn't been great. And I'm just not a believer in the rest of the guys to the same level as every other team left
Well,
in the postseason.
that's the second series I was going to talk about was the Mets and the Phillies. You talk about the Mets and their bullpen, but the Phillies bullpen was even a bigger mess. To me, they didn't have enough guys out there, and their big guys that they rely on have never been good in postseason. And,
Right.
and to me, that was a series that the Mets had a chance to win, and they downplay themselves because of their route to the postseason and the doubleheader in Atlanta, and then flying to play another series, and flying back. And to me, it's reminiscent of the Texas Rangers last year, where they finished on the road and then they barely squeaked in, and then they had to keep traveling. Like, what was it? Flying over. Bochy was talking about flying over Arlington, flying over Dallas to get to Tampa or whatever it was. And to me, their Odyssey, the Mets Odyssey, is similar to that. So, when you're looking ahead to their next series, I could see them, other than the fact that I just said I'm a big bullpen guy. And like
Right.
you pointed out, Edwin has not been the same since celebrating for Puerto Rico.
Correct.
Or was it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so, but they got another
They,
shortstop. They got a shortstop who's like an MVP.
they got this. Well, yeah, he could be. There's an argument. Obviously, not going to be. And you got the magic Gibby sauce. So,
Well,
anytime
that's
you
it.
got that in your clubhouse,
I've
that's
heard Gibby interviews several times, and he's so self-deprecating and Mets deprecating. And you go, "Come on, Gibby, you're full of shit. You
yeah,
really think this team is going to win? I know you do."
that's 100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
but
charm. That's the
yeah,
charm.
yeah. So you like the Mets to be knocked out in the next?
I do. I think they just I eventually, I mean, like you say, anything can happen into short series, but now we're getting into the longer series. I just
Yeah.
don't think they have the bullets that the other teams have.
Well,
Now,
to me, if it's the Padres and the Mets, then I'll take the Padres. If it's the Dodgers and the Mets, I'm open to Dave Roberts screwing it up
fair
somehow.
enough. Fair enough. Yeah, yeah, that's a high
Um,
probability.
Another series that just wrapped up, Yankees and Royals. And we talk about the Royals and their rebuild over one off season. 113.5 million was their payroll, and the Yankees were 302.5. I'm not a big fan of the Yankees bullpen personally. And
Right?
I'm not a big fan of, well, obviously Judge is proving
I'm
in the
not
postseason.
even a big fan of their lineup, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at it and you're like,
John Birdie is playing first base in.
Verdugo's out there, and you're
Yeah.
like, these are not the Yankees of old. I mean, their offense for the last number of years hasn't been great. It's been Aaron Judge, you know what I mean? And if he's not in the lineup, it's pretty bad.
Well,
But
Giancarlo Stanton is starting to crank it up now.
well, he is, which is a shock to me. I mean, hey, more power to you. I mean, that's always been a guy that I see a lot of holes in that swing, and a guy you can get out when you need to, but I mean, they're not. So, I mean, they're getting Judge out. Finally got a hit. So, I mean, still, they have holes. It's kind of like there's, I call it an arrogance with having an abundance of everything like the Dodgers have, that you kind of don't see the flaws you have, and you shouldn't have them with everything you have at your disposal, but you do.
Did you watch the elimination game on Thursday night?
I did. I
And
did.
what was your impression? I think that Volpe is a punk, you know, like.
Well, I thought there was a bit much. I mean,
Yeah, and
sure.
like it's like you got your big brother behind you, and you're pushing somebody around, and you're going to be protected if anything starts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, come on, you're Volpe, you're not Derek Jeters.
That's right. You've yet to do it. That's
Yeah,
correct. Yeah, you haven't taken that step. But I thought Kansas City just kind of petered out. You know what I mean? I thought it was like they just kind of found out they were Kansas City.
They
You
were
know,
riding Witt and Sal Perez, who I love Sal Perez.
and they didn't have great series.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
didn't. Even at that point, for them to go into the final games of the series going, we're already winners. That's a bad attitude to have if you want to go out and win a World Series.
you,
We
you've already yeah.
lost 106 games last year. Look at us now. That's a bad
It's
attitude going
it's the old Buffalo Bills Super Bowl things. Okay, boys, go out there and rest on your laurels.
in.
That's what the Royals were doing.
I know we've lost 3 Super Bowls in a row, but
Yeah.
just getting here, getting to a
Good job.
key.
Good job.
And the last series was the Guardians and the Tigers. I mean, they're both small market central, AL Central, underrated division. 102.5 million for the Guardians payroll, 103.6 for the Tigers. These are two underdogs. So how do you pick a favorite in that?
Well, you pick a favorite because the Tigers are infinitely more likable and haven't been there for a while. And you are enjoying the fan base just reveling in this run, even though they have no business being in the playoffs. If you ask me, as a team that was 500 going into September, having played the White Sox a lot,
Right.
you know what I mean?
To me, that White Sox presence in the AL Central was the defining reason for 3 teams going to the postseason. You know,
100%. There's
we're each 12-1. The 2 wild cards were each 12-1 against the White Sox, and everybody
it's
else
in
only got to play them 6 times or whatever.
This is what you get when you live in an instant gratification world with everything's designed to be March Madness. We're always looking for, so everybody gets invited to the dance. And when everybody gets invited, you end up with 6 seeds going to the World Series. Now, some people like that. I guess you can decide to enjoy that. But if you're trying to determine who the best team is, that's certainly not the way to do it. But people in Detroit are loving it and they show up and they spend their money. So, I mean, it's going to be a fun ball game to watch for sure. I mean,
You know,
although Matt Boyd probably is going to be starting for the Indians, or sorry, the Guardians now. So I mean, that's different. That's what you get in Game 5.
but you know who's sitting back smoking a cigar and drinking champagne and watching the playoffs is Kenny Williams.
Right?
Like
Right?
they took him down in Chicago for the
Yeah.
White Sox. I don't even know what the name of the stadium is anymore, but
Is it U.S. Cellular still?
I have no idea.
Right.
But here he is. He gets bumped. The blame goes on him. We're going to replace him with. And look what's happened to the White Sox. That's really.
Well, the minute you hire Tony La Russa for another go around, you're headed in that direction. I don't care. I know, but
No, I
you're
agree
headed in that.
100% with you. I'm not a big Tony guy. So, um, let's see. I think we're heading towards our NFL predictions, which is going to be a
All right.
weekly part of this. But before that, um, I know that I think Scotty Mack and I in our last episode talked about the end of season presser that the Blue Jays staged with Mark Shapiro, followed 30 minutes later by Ross Atkins.
By
And
design.
yeah, clearly we know.
Hmm. Yeah, as
And
opposed to last
we
year when
know.
Mark wasn't even going to go last year. I don't
Yeah.
think. Days
So,
later.
what were your general impressions? I mean, we all watched it or saw highlights of it. What were your general impressions?
Well, from a PR guy, and as you are, I think it continues to be a PR nightmare. I think there's a lot of people in the organization that just don't understand how to handle these situations. And I think there's just a lot of contempt for the fans that comes from the top of the organization, and there continues to be. And I think you see it when they do speak. Um, it's frustrating, and I think that's where you lose the fans. And I think, as you said earlier, the reputation isn't great, and nor should it be. Um, from just my experience being in that environment, it is not a strength of the general manager to speak publicly or speak, period. Uh, you just it just never ends well, and you're trying to sell something that isn't sellable at this point, and there doesn't seem to be a clear path, and it's about trying to get through the event of PR, of a press conferencing, having to do it and talking down to people and just getting it done and then forgetting it happened. And it just, that's, you need to be more upfront, more honest with your customers and more honest with yourself about what where you're at with the program. Um, every time it happens, it's kind of a disaster, and it's nothing's really changed. It just keeps getting worse the longer you keep trotting out the same, you know, process answers or answers that you're using your Rolodex to think. It's the only thing about being natural or unnatural. Good PR is very natural. I could talk to you all day about people who practice good PR, and sometimes they don't even know they're doing it. I would tell you John Gibbons would do that. He practiced great but PR by being a very natural, honest, direct human being, where scribes such as yourself, who are looking for angles, would be hesitant to ever do anything that would, disrespect or put Gibby in a bad light, because he just treated everybody with such respect. So you get the benefit of the doubt, where I think that's what's missing here. They treat PR as if it's a process and, a script they must follow, rather than just talking to the fan base through the media with some honesty. And I thought that comes through every time they have that. It's like, how are we supposed to answer the question directly, rather than, just answering the question? And that they've probably struggled with that.
I thought the biggest, and it just reflects how poor that whole day went for the front office. And the biggest support they got was because Rosie DiManno said effing shit show in a question. And nobody should question Rosie DiManno's credentials, because she's faced down the Taliban in Afghanistan. I drove her to spring training. She had been in spring training one day and she flew to Japan and caught a cab to go next to the nuclear facility that was affected by the tsunami and the earthquake. She she was in New York City. She managed to get down there on September 12th, the day after, and she covered the whole thing down there. So don't question her on her baseball questions. I mean, Sportsnet is the one that chose to go live with reporters' questions. They're poaching on writers and having them ask the important questions, and they get content out of it. So don't get on Rosie DiManno for that. That's my point, and I don't know where I'm going with that.
Well, I mean, well, for starters, we live in an age where the media has become the enemy of the people, much like government in most people's eyes, and it's ridiculous. They're there to do a job, and they're the conduit to the fan. And if you don't want them asking difficult questions, then you're just a fanboy who doesn't want to hear anything negative about your team. And I'm sorry, that doesn't make my enjoyment of the game better. Rosie is the GOAT. I don't care what you say. Yes, she's got no time for bullshit. And we all know that. And very, very smart with the timing of the question. She
Oh,
waited
God.
for all the other softball questions to be up there. Let everybody kind of set the stage, and then you come in with the hammer because the question needed to be asked. Now, if there were other more difficult questions that appeared before that, would she have phrased it that way? Probably not. But it
But
needed to be phrased at that point in time to that group.
and
She's
she was using it as a quote. It was a quote from, she
100%.
said, someone in that clubhouse. And
That's right.
and so it wasn't her using that language, it was her quoting someone using that language.
And going back to my original point with public relations, would Rosie have done that with a different management group, say the previous group, with Gibby as a manager, say, and it's just Alex as the GM, would she have done it in that manner? And the answer is unequivocally no, because that's what you've set yourself up for, is this kind of friction, this kind of where you have contempt, for the fan base, where you're perched on your up on high, and you're like, to the peasants, let them eat cake. Basically, they're unhappy. You've got to be kidding me. Like the disdain. So then but this is what you get. So people are looking for those opportunities to go, well, if you're going to treat fan base through the media in this way, well, then you're going to get it back. And we're going to find those moments to take you apart, because you just haven't built those relationships with the media and the fan base. They haven't been built. And that's why you end up getting questions like that at that moment in time. And until somebody does something to change that relationship, just how it's going to be and why the criticism of the regime and why they're still there. Clearly, it's fair.
Well, we'll wrap up the baseball portion of this, and it's a good spot to go with pointing out that this front office and this organization and this team heading towards 2025 has nowhere to go but up. That's a nice positive outlook. They got nowhere to go but up.
It's like my stock portfolio now. I mean, how much lower can it get?
So I just want to point out before we're getting to NFL right now, and each
Right.
of us each week are going to have three, maybe four best bets, and we'll see how we do week to week. But you grew up
I don't
on
like your chances, Rich. I don't like your chances.
you grew up in the Golden Horseshoe area, heading towards Buffalo, and became a big Buffalo Bills fan. How did that background happen? And also the Sabres. I feel bad for you about the Sabres, but the Bills.
God, that's painful. Even last night, it's the same movie years over and over again, every game. But I continue to watch. Well, Sabres. My father was an original season ticket holder with the Sabres. He walked into the building and they showed him his seats when there was no seats in the rink and Memorial Auditorium and what his view would look like. So he was an original. So he had season tickets for, my gosh, I mean, up until a few years ago. It just didn't, work for everybody. And I had Bills tickets for like 23 years. Became a diehard Bills fan when they went to the playoffs, and I was a young lad, and they were in Cincinnati, and they had a heartbreaking loss, and I went to the bathroom and cried. It hurt me so bad. I'm like, oh no, we've got a problem. So I mean, I'm not quite as tied emotionally to the games these days, but being in that area, you got Buffalo news every time. That was that. We got Buffalo, Commander Tom with our cartoons and Irv Weinstein with our news. So I mean, that was just the hometown team. Toronto was too far away. You just didn't go to Toronto, and you just became a fan of the local team, which were the Buffalo sports teams, and I remain that way through pain today. So
I was at the Sombrero for the wide right. I was sitting at the 50-yard line about 10 rows up. I got the seats I bought them from the the New York Mets traveling secretary because they had spring training in St. Pete at the time. And I had two others that were directly behind the goalpost. So I was sitting with my buddy at midfield, and my other two friends were sitting like they could have caught a good field goal, but it was
well,
wide right.
well, on that note, the funny part is I was in Minneapolis the next year when they played Washington, sitting in the end zone, and the last kick before the game started in practice by Chip Lowmiller, I caught the ball. I have it to this day.
Not
The,
leaping out of the stands or anything.
What's no, I did not come out of the stands. I made a hell of a grab though. I fought it. And at that moment, I'm like, the Bills are winning for sure. I caught a football at the Super Bowl. I still have it. So it didn't go so from there. It was downhill. Thurman forgot his helmet and the whole routine. But I also was at the next year was at the Super Bowl. That was kind of fun.
Yeah. I covered the Bills for like 3 or 4 years during the Rob Johnson and Doug Flutie,
Yes,
Chip
you did. I
Kelly's last
remember that
year.
now.
Yeah.
That's funny. I forgot
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So that was fun. That was,
Those were fun years with
yeah, they
Flutie.
were. I was doing French reports for Radio Canada
They
because I was the only
still
guy there who was speaking French.
I still believe they win that football game if Doug Flutie starts in Tennessee, not Rob Johnson.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's
It
no Music City
wouldn't have come down
miracle.
to that.
Yeah, there is no miracle.
All right. Let's go we'll alternate. You go with your first pick, and it doesn't have to be priority, but just one pick, and I'll come back with one pick, and we'll end up with six or seven. What do
Okay.
you got?
I think my favorite pick of the week is the strangely
And
enough the
this is week 6.
right.
Yeah.
The Denver Broncos getting a field goal at home versus the Chargers. I just don't see. I think Denver will hang in the game, and I think the Chargers are a bit of a mess right now. And I think it's going to be a really tight game. So getting that field goal, I think it's going to be a field goal game, and I really love them at home, and they're playing better. I'm not a Peyton guy, but they're playing better and staying in football games. So I'm big on the Denver Broncos this week. Give me the bad teams, baby.
The like doesn't Bo Nix keep them close even when he only throws for 60 yards?
Well, right, and he can't run away from anybody. The game's going
No.
to be close.
I saw him when
There's
he was at Auburn. I said, this guy stinks.
right, and he still does.
Uh, my first pick is New England +7 against hosting the Houston Texans. Drake May.
Seven. It's not 6.5. Hey, are you making your own
No,
lines?
no, I got this off CBS. CBS
It's an
Sports.
extra half point.
Yeah,
Plus
they
seven
bumped it
minus 125.
right. +12.
Yeah, right. It's right.
No, plus
I
seven.
see how you're playing this game.
Line. That's
I
how
see
we
what
go on
we're doing.
CBS Sports Line. Drake May, I think a young coach, the Texans coach can relate to the Patriots coach. So I see him not wanting to run it up on him, even if he's got the better team. And I can see a backdoor cover at 7. And I can also see, without Nico Horner, the Texans struggling to put as many points as you might think.
Collins, Nico
So
Collins. Yeah.
Nico
Yeah,
Collins, yeah.
yeah, that's right. No, I can get behind that. All right, my next one is going to be the Tampa Bay Bucks giving 3.5 at New Orleans. I think New Orleans is, well, they've got the quarterback issue now with Carr being out, but Dennis Allen is your coach, and there's a lot of variance, let's say, in their play. And I think Tampa Bay has established themselves as a solid team, and Baker is a solid quarterback, which is strange. And they've got a hell of an offense. So I think they're going to probably run away from them. And I think this is where you start to see New Orleans turn back into a 6-win football team, so to speak.
Yeah, that happens to be my second game also. The Bucks over New Orleans -3.5. We got the same line there.
Going to cancel each other out. So
The my point is like Spencer Rattler, I think, is
yeah,
going to be the
he
quarterback
is
in New
Spencer
Orleans.
Rattler.
And I watched CNN over my wife's shoulder. Debbie loves to watch CNN, and they interviewed a couple of Bucks players who are they went to Tulane University. They practiced there all week,
Right.
but their thoughts are with the people of Florida,
Of
and they
course.
promised to win for them. So they didn't promise to win by 3 or less. So I'm saying they win by
That was
4
not brought
or
up.
more.
Did somebody ask him if they were going to cover? It was
No.
not. No, just win.
But yeah, so that was my second pick. So we're in agreement on that. So like if you're a gambler, go with us because
The
how
lock.
often do we agree?
We aren't often wrong either, generally. Just ask us.
Okay, who you got number
My
3?
third one is another road favorite. I am taking the Detroit Lions to go into Dallas, who also a high variance team and has shown a propensity to not play with Mike McCarthy, real crisp ball every now and then. And I think the Lions are going to just grind them out, and I think they're just going to win the game, handily. Not saying they're going to blow them out, but I think they're just going to play better football than Dallas does on a down-to-down basis. And I think over 60 minutes that matters. So I'm taking the Lions -3.
That is not my game. That is not my third pick. But I won't go against you on that. I mean, when you talk about Mike McCarthy, I see Mike McCarthy as the Dave Roberts of the NFL. I mean, you look at him in moments of repose when he's not expecting to be on camera, and he looks like either he doesn't want to be there or he doesn't know what he's going to do next. And
Except Dave Roberts is getting his info from a highly respected analytics team, and McCarthy's getting it from Jerry Jones. That makes it even better.
I think Jerry Jones makes more money than the analytics team.
He does. He does. He has more say.
My third pick is the upstart Washington Commanders
Jeez. Recency bias much?
+6.5. But you know I
It's
got
not 7. You sure it's not 7 for you?
+6.5 against the Ravens. I think that there's comparisons obviously between Jaden Daniels and Lamar, but he's trying to dismiss it. But I think you can't escape that. And this is his role model, the young rookie Commanders quarterback, and he's going to put up some numbers. Baltimore has trouble against the pass, And this guy can do both pass and run. They barely won. The Ravens won against another LSU quarterback, Heisman winner, Joe Burrow, but he shouldn't have won. He fumbled a snap,
Oh
and then
man,
they
that was
missed a
some
field
game.
goal, and then they come back and kick a field goal, and he did nothing. It's
He,
like
that's right. That's
it's
right.
like Tom Brady celebrating the Seattle Super Bowl win, was a guy intercepts the ball on the goal line when they
Yeah,
should have been running the ball in, and Brady goes from moping around to celebrating and putting it on his legacy, you know?
that's right. Put it added to the fingers, another ring. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so that's my third one. And you said you had one over under?
Well, I did a fourth one. I mean, I'm finding it hard to see how a lot of points are going to be scored Monday night with the Bills and the Jets as the
Oh,
current.
there's your Bills. Yeah.
There's my Bills. So it was 41 and a half, but it's now 41. But I'll still take that as an under. Uh, man, I don't think the Jets have a good offense for the most part, and the Bills are starting to get a little healthier on defense again. And you can count on McDermott to have the defense generally, managing to limit points. And the Bills offense, if Josh isn't hero Josh, which sometimes is good enough, there's just nowhere to go with the football. And he's showing signs the last couple of weeks of the game they played, the last game in Houston. He started to panic a little. He was running out of clean pockets, expecting them not to be clean and creating trouble for himself. So, I mean, I love Josh Allen. He's a hell of a football player, but I think they're going to try and run the ball and slow the clock. And I think the Jets are just going to have trouble doing what the Jets do. And they have a good defense. So I'm going to go under 41 and look for a, 17-15 final, so to speak.
Well, let's put a ribbon on this in this episode 39 of Exit Philosophy 2, episode 1 with Mal Romanin. And still up there is griffsthepitch.com if you want to go find some columns, some previews of baseball division series, league championship series will be out on Saturday. And conversations, a recent one with Ernie Witt, talking about his relationship with Buck Martinez and his history of coaching Team Canada. So check out griffsthepitch.com, and we will have this podcast up there. And Mal hopefully will be back next week, and hopefully we'll have had 7 winners for you in the NFL, and we will discuss more baseball.
Yeah,
So
sounds
thank
good.
you.
And I look forward to it, Rich. This is it's been fun, and I hope everybody gets some value out of this. And I think hopefully we can add a lot more PR talk to what really goes on in the clubhouses and dugouts and front offices too. I think
Yeah.
that's a
That's
perspective.
that'll be a strength of Griff's the Pitch, with 12 and 30 years to about almost 50 years of PR behind the scenes on the road. Well, we won't talk about everything on the road, but a lot that can be spoken
Pretty
about. We
quiet.
will.
That's right. So I look forward to it, Rich. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Mel, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.